Hello. Good morning. Hello, good morning, everyone. Can I have your attention, please? We want to start our event right now. And so, a pleasant morning to you all. My name is Richard Matey, the coordinator for the Alliance for Empowering Rural Communities. And we are having this side event on aligning public finance with the 1.5 degrees goal and a just energy transition for Africa. Now, I welcome you all to this morning's session and thank you very much for being with us today. I extend a warm welcome to you all, and on behalf of the organizing team, the Alliance for Empowering Rural Communities, both ends, Milieudefensie, EGI, and AbibiNsroma Foundation, I want to sincerely thank and acknowledge every one of these organizations for helping us to put this event together. Today, I would like to point your attention to the role public finance play in enabling fossil fuels to go ahead. And from 2019 to 2021, for example, G20 countries and their major multilateral development banks provided at least $55 billion per year, US dollars per year, in international public finance for oil, gas, and coal. This fossil finance is almost 2 times more than their support for clean energy, which averagely is only 29 billion US dollars per year. This support directly counters the G20 countries' commitment to align public financial flows to 1.5 degrees under the Paris Agreement. The international public finance has an outsized impact on global energy systems because it offers a government-backed credit ratings and also provides at low belt market rates and comes with large research and technical capacity and signals broader government priorities. Right now, G20 countries and the MDBs are overwhelmingly using their international public finance to prop up fossil fuel companies and prolong the fossil fuel era. However, there is some new movement to reverse these flows and use international public finance institutions to instead support a globally just energy transition. The statement on international public support for clean energy transition, here known as the Glasgow Public Finance Statement, is a joint commitment made at COP26 in November 2021 to end direct international public finance support for fossils by the end of 2020, and instead prioritize public finance for clean energy. The signatories to this commitment include some of the largest historic providers of public finance for fossils, including G20 members like Canada, Germany, Italy, the United States, and France. Following this, countries like Sweden, the UK, Denmark, Finland, and the European investment banks have published strong policies to support ending public finance for fossils. The other countries like Belgium and the Netherlands have published policies that need improvement. And countries like Germany, Italy, Canada, the USA, and Spain are yet to implement the statement on international public support for clean energy transition. If all these signatories follow through their commitments, this would shift at least 28 billion US dollars a year out of fossil fuels and into clean energy, which would help shift an even larger sums of public and private money. Much greater financial flows from high-income countries to lower-income countries are urgently needed for clean energy as well as debt cancellation, climate finance, loss and damage compensation to ensure a globally just energy transition. But the Glasgow statement represents a potentially transformative starting point. You are here today because we are asking for your support to call on countries like Australia, Mexico, Japan, Korea, Norway, the EBRD, the AIIB, to join the Glasgow statement. With this, I hand over to Mrs. Poshiedu-Mensah, who is the National Coordinator for 350 Ghana Reducing Our Carbon, as our moderator for today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Richard. Please, let's give him a hand of applause for his great statements. And to our panel, you are all welcome. My name again is Poshiedu-Mensah. And it's a very high-level meeting because the topic is a very interesting one, which we are looking forward to make sure that the right perspective are shared across the African regions and our leadership and our roles are put to play here. So we have on the panel Mr. Samuel Okulony, CEO of Environmental Governance Institute in Uganda. Please, you can give us a wave. Thank you very much. We have Mr. Kenneth Amoateng, the Chief Executive Officer of AbibiNsroma Foundation from Ghana. We have Ms. Richard-AERC, African Regional Campaigner for 350.org, Africa from Kenya. And then please, we have Tando Lukudu, Coordinator, Climate Action Network, South Africa. Great. And we have Mr. Musa Sowi. He is also the National Alliance for Agroecology from the Gambia. We have selected regional leaders here from the various African countries, and we know that will do justice to align public finance with 1.5 degrees goal and a just transition for Africa. We want to welcome you all to the panel. I want to ask, starting from Kenneth, your first introduction and what you do.
Yes, my name is...
Sorry.
My name is Kenneth Nana Amoateng. I work with the AbibiNsroma Foundation and also work on the ECAs, basically for the community, the injustice that the public finance are doing to the local communities in Ghana. So we are here to call on the world leaders, a call on public finance for them to act now. Thank you.
Please.
Yes, my name is Samuel Okulony-EGI. Like I've been introduced, I work with the Environment Governance Institute in Uganda, and we work basically to decarbonize public finance, focusing on the export credit agencies. And we know that Uganda is one of the countries which is currently busy looking for public finance to exploit its oil. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, you can take over.
Hello, everyone. My name is Charity Megwe. I am the regional campaigner at 350 Africa, and I also work on public finance campaigns, as well as work with communities to ensure that we are urging public finance institutions to establish a fossil fuel finance exclusion policies in their lending portfolios, and also just empowering communities to be able to speak up for their rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, you can take over.
My full name is Musa F. Sow. I'm a Gambian. I am the president of a network on agroecology and climate change adaptation in the Gambia. I am the second vice president of ROPA. ROPA is the regional network for all West African countries on production and processing. I think I could tell you more about what I do. Basically, my first intervention or interest is how do we promote adaptation by creating resilience for the local communities. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Tando Lukuko. As you heard, I'm the coordinator of the South African Climate Action Network South Africa. We do work in three main spaces, if you will. We work with community-based organizations. We work on economic transitions, under which we engage on issues like the just energy transition, just transitions, and the policies related to that. And then, of course, we will work on COP and specific issues related to COP, primarily loss and damage and adaptation. I'm not sure how much detail to give, but for now, I think that should be covered. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Great leaders. And my first question would go to Kenneth. Basically, I want to find out from Kenneth, what can be done to empower local communities to speak and stand against the further development and expansion of ECA-backed projects like the offshore Cape 3 Points project, which has been impacted communities in the western region in Ghana? If you can throw more light on that.
Thank you very much. I know there is a lot of development going on since we get oil in 2010. In Cape 3 Points, we have received 1.4 billion from the World Bank, and also 400 million from United Kingdom finance agents on that offshore in gas and also in oil, which is not benefiting the local community. Their life in that community has become an eyesore, which has made them be so poor because of the promise that they promised them that when they discover oil in that area, they are going to benefit from it. And so what we do is that we empower the community for them to speak out with their parliamentarian, also speak out with the chief, and tell them that the oil is not helping them and it's not for their future. And so we, as a civil society organization, we go to the community, mobilize them, train them to stand for their right, and also look for the injustice that it's happening for them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have to always empower the young people and the people at the grassroots to stand up for their rights. I'll call on someone to make his presentation on how we can ensure that public finance function supports the just transition we are looking out for. So you can have your presentation on the podium, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I basically had a small presentation, which is basically focusing on who's financing climate disaster in Uganda. And I will just go quickly through a background to oil activities in Uganda. As my colleague go through the slides, in Uganda we have a saying that says that when the front frog falls into a pit, then the behind one should be aware. We know that there are many countries that have already started the exploiting of the oil. However, the impacts that they have faced, the catastrophes, are enormous. And we at the behind frog should be aware of the impacts and possibly take a different path. But it seems that in our countries, this proverb is not teaching our leaders much. In 2006, we made discoveries of oil in Uganda. And of course, in 2017, there was acquisition of more data in 2007. And in 2014, we discovered the confirmation of 6.5 billion barrels of oil. And so many companies have come into the country and working towards exploiting this oil, and mainly using the public finance coming from the global north to ensure that these companies are able to exploit the oil. There are quite three major projects which are ongoing, in addition to other different midstream infrastructure. There's a Tilenga oil project which is operated by Total, and this is happening inside the national park, Marshall Falls National Park. There's Kingfisher oil project, which is happening on the shores of Lake Albert. The Lake Albert is supporting communities both in Uganda and DRC. It's a transboundary lake, and many communities are depending on it for fishing activities and economic bay. Then there's ECOP, the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, which is running 1,443 kilometers, running from Uganda up to Tanga. and passing through different key ecosystems, running especially and snaking its way through Lake Victoria. I will speak to the Tilenga project, which is happening in Mashon Falls. You'll see to the left, you'll see a giraffe. Mashon Falls is mainly known for giraffes. And inside this national park, there are 35 well pads, and they are going to have a lot of development within the park. There's going to be a lot of infill pipelines. There's going to be water obstruction within the park. There's going to be a crossing of River Nile, which I am sure that Egypt would be taking interest in River Nile, because I moved through the whole country and realized that much of the fresh water that Egypt depends on comes from River Nile. Then the other project is the Kingfisher that I just spoke about. But then if I go to Kingfisher, you find that the development of Tilenga project has already resulted into heavy impacts on the people and the conservation. There's already rapid destruction of the park. You know, if it's a sensitive ecosystem, normally you would want to protect it because it generates a lot of money for tourism. Our country heavily depends on tourism as sustainable means of income. However, destroying this unique and opening up heavy infrastructure, opening up roads inside the park is already disturbing the ecosystem. Recently, I was in the park, and you find that animals such as elephants, which are sensitive to vibrations and noise, have started moving out from the park, and they end up in community gardens. And this is causing already animal-human wildlife conflicts. The Kingfisher project happening on the shores of Lake Albert. You know that Lake Albert being a transboundary lake and supporting both the communities in Uganda and DRC is already being the developments already happening on the lake. And you find in case of an oil spill, it's going to have a lot of devastating impact on both the Ugandan side and the Tanzanian side. Having a lake water obstruction point, which is going to support the entire oil industry. And this is going to have a lot of the strain on the lake, on the water body. And this is what our people, what our people depend on for the fresh water within the region. I met with this lady you'll see on the photo, and the only way she gets information from the oil companies is through the signpost you see at the bottom picture. But visibly you can see that the signpost has not been used for quite a very long time, and this lady has not yet been compensated. So the issues of human rights are still being raised. Yeah, the issues of human rights have been raised. Lack of information, poor land acquisition processes are being impacted are being felt on the people. The ECOP, like some of us have already heard about, is one of the longest electrically heated pipeline in the world, passing through different key ecosystems that are of international importance. A 24-diameter thermal insulated pipeline will be displacing thousands of people from their land, and these communities that have not yet fully being compensated will end up more into protected area. And this is all happening because of the support. Our country is a poor country. It's a third world country. And they cannot exploit oil on their own, but then they depend on finances and guarantees from companies from the global north who provide guarantees for these companies to operate in our country and causing a lot of destruction to our people. You find that a lot of the land, the displacements, the chimpanzee you're seeing in there is one of the areas that is being affected. Its migratory corridor is being affected. The breeding grounds are being affected. And yet we heavily depend on tourism to be able to generate sustainable income for our economy. We've been working in ensuring that insurers and proof their investments in our country. And as you can clearly see, there's going to be a debate. Is it for the people, for the wildlife, or for our economy? The communities you see on the right, on the top side, are communities that have been displaced by different oil activities. And this is in Ramutunga, one of the areas just next to the pipeline. And the land was being acquired, not fully compensated, so they had to find a resettlement area. The giraffe you're seeing is looking at the insurers. Are you going to put money in an area that is going to displace or kill our home, our habitat? That animal you see down is one of the national heritage within our country. But its habitat is being risked, and its habitat will soon be destroyed when you go on and allow public finance to invest in an ecosystem which is supposed to sponsor the economy. So we've been engaging in our campaign to see to it that public finance is not into the fossil fuels. So far, we've got some confirmation that these are some of the export credit agencies that have stayed clear that they will not support finance oil activities in Uganda. We know that CES of Italy made a commitment, though we know that Italy has not yet made a public statement committing itself not to continue its export of public finance globally, which they made commitment in a Glasgow statement, which Richard-AERC said. Euler Hans as well made commitment that they would not finance fossil fuels or support fossil fuels in Uganda. We know that the UK export credit agencies, previously they were supporting oil activities, especially for the construction of the airport. But so far they have made a public statement, the public policy, they are going to stop export support for fossil fuels, and we'll be beneficiaries of this. Recently, France also made public commitment, and specifically for the activities in Uganda, looking at the impact it will have on both people, the environment, and the wildlife. However, there are others that are still trying to make sure that they are not yet clear of the fossil fuels in our country. We know that for Uganda to exploit the oil, if they are to exploit the oil, not only export credit agencies will provide financial support, but also there is going to be reinsurers. They need to get more to export the risk further to other companies. But our engagement knows that the local insurers within Uganda can only provide a maximum of 30% cover, but the 70% has to come from the global north to be able to proceed with these developments. However, there are some reinsurers that have already stayed clear through the different engagements and campaigns that they will not be able to provide any kind of reinsurance to these companies. But my call here is that there are companies which are still not yet clear of that we need to put much of the attention and focus on. Afrexim recently confirmed the $200 million US support to oil activities in Uganda. And this is basically trying to support climate disaster, trying to support this mass displacement and destruction of communities within the area. Sinosure is always silent in as far as committing if they will support or they will not support, but we know that it's one of the companies being approached. Lloyds of London, which is one of the companies, and those other ones that you're seeing are put into red. We know that most of these companies and the countries in the global north are basically trying to switch to clean and renewable energy. However, when their companies leave their countries and come into the global south in our countries, they continue investing in fossil fuels and risking to put us into stranded assets and locking us out of the just energy transition. So we need to engage and see to it that all the companies, all the countries that committed to end public support to fossil fuels really honor their commitments and ensure that we are able to achieve the climate goals and ensure that we align our developments to 1.5. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel, for sharing with us on ECOP and the impact on these communities. We would want Charity to talk about the common examples of community ownership as a key principle of a just transition. Thank you.
Thank you. So basically, I wanted first to speak about a just transition. So as Samuel has explained, the many impacts of fossil fuel projects, even before they start and how they are impacting communities. You can imagine how worse the situation is going to be if at all those projects are developed. The impacts are going to be more than what is being experienced currently. So we know in terms of the climate crisis, one thing that needs to happen is a transition away from fossil fuels to clean, renewable energy. But we know the challenges that make even the impacts of the climate crisis much harder is the situation of growing inequality, poverty, and significant unemployment, especially among local communities. So how do we move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy? So I wanted to give a couple of examples of what a just transition looks like in terms of different perspectives. So this is not a claim at a definition of what a just transition is, but because we know this is a highly contested matter, but just to give an insight of different perspectives. So one, we know that, and especially most of what activists and campaigners have been calling for is a just transition. But what exactly does that look like? Is it just for instance, if this COP was to deliver, if different political leaders were to say that they are moving away from fossil fuels and they plan to invest in renewable energy, will that really mean a just transition? Obviously not. It's just swapping one type of energy with another. So this isn't exactly a just transition. It's basically just another type of transition. This is not the kind of transition we want. We just don't want a swapping of different energy systems with another. The other different perspective of a just transition is a protective just transition. We know that the principle of a just transition was forged by the labor movement when they were trying to come up and speak for their needs as workers, because we know that because a lot of people work in the fossil fuel industry, and once we move away from that system of energy, so many people are going to lose their jobs. So the other perspective is a protective transition. This aims to cushion workers, especially in the fossil fuel industry, in terms of how they can still be, they can still transition to the renewable energy field. This means that there is need for training and absorption in different energy sectors, so that they can be empowered and move along with the system, so that no one is left behind as we seek to transition. But the desired just transition is not one that is just simply protective. The desired just transition is one that is transformative. This means having people at the core of the transition. This is what exactly a social justice system looks like. It entails a transition, not just in the energy sector, but reimagining a transition in different realms of different sectors, including transportation, housing, and so on, that rely on energy. So this requires a shift in our ownership models. Currently, we know that energy is usually, our current energy systems are usually extractive and centralized. But the desired approach that puts people at the core is an energy system that prioritizes people by having not an extractive system, but a regenerative system that transforms, that is able to transform what we currently know of to where we need to be in terms of a sustainable energy future. So this is a vision that is not extractive, does not seek to exploit people, but seeks to empower people, to have social ownership of communities in terms of the energy system. However, we know that in Africa, about 600 million people still do not have access to electricity. This means that a just transition is not applicable to everyone. What we also need in Africa is a just development. But we know that there has been, the fossil fuel industry has seeded doubt in most of us that for development to happen, we need fossil fuels. But this is not the case. The reality is that we can develop, Africa can develop without the need for fossil fuels. And a just development means a transformative way of implementing energy systems that are not that are decentralized and community owned, so that communities are better positioned to emerge from poverty to have a sustainable way of living. One example I will give you in terms of a just development in Africa is the case of Kenya, and not just because I come from Kenya, but Kenya has at least 92% renewable energy, and that is what it relies on. This doesn't mean that Kenya doesn't have massive hydrocarbon and coal deposits, but Kenya chooses not to use this. And I'm not saying that our government is super good. We know that they have been trying to still exploit these resources, but compared to other countries like Nigeria and South Africa, which relies on massive amounts of fossil fuels in their energy systems, they are usually significant amounts of load shedding in those countries, and in as much as a bit of the country is developed, we know that there's still a lot of people living in poverty in those countries. So it doesn't mean that if we focus on fossil fuels, that would be the key to development in these nations. Different industries can still rely on renewable energy and still facilitate the economy to be uplifted without really, with renewable energy. And so the notion that fossil fuels is the key to development is not a just, doesn't feature in the principle of a transformative just transition or a just development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charity. We are all looking forward to a transformative just transition, but we don't want a just transition that will exploit people. So we'll ask Musa to give us the impact of climate change in Africa so that we can understand what has been happening so far. Thank you, Musa.
Thank you very much. My presentation would take a look at, first of all, the banks that are financing the climate change. Maybe also look at the opportunities from renewable energy, and I would the possible solutions for renewable energy, and then also some recommendations, if I would be allowed by the moderator.
Sure.
First of all, let me say that the funders, most of the banks who are funding gas and oil, plays a big role in influencing our policies. Most of our policies are not policies that are responding to renewable energy, because these strong banks, strong funders would have been engaging our policymakers in the corridor to make the policies respond to what their needs are. The other one also is the community itself. It's a lose-lose situation for the fact that when they are bringing funds that have to support oil and gas, do not factor the protection of the environment and also the local or the communities that are living in the environment. So it means it has created a more of a lose-lose situation at one point. And the other one also is the defaults that comes from those funders of gas and oil. Most of the time, they do not honor their community protection that they have envisaged or have in their contracts that they have signed with some of these suppliers, because their interest is they're only looking at profits. But then the opportunities that we have currently when we promote renewable energy is, first of all, is cleaner and more efficient in the future, because we want to have a situation where the environment is balanced, meaning that the carbon dioxide that is that we emit and others could be taken by the trees. We need to have that balance. But then that's what actually the clean energy brings. Secondly, is diversity of energy supply. It will reduce the dependency of having to depend on imports, for example. Most of the energy needs, like one of my panelists said, we still don't have, or not all the the citizens of Africa have access to electricity. So it means that it would diversify, give an opportunity for us to be in control of our energy supply. Reduce dependency, yes. Also it creates creating economic development and jobs, because when we have control of our energy supply, basically it also generates some income and also gives us some jobs. And it's stable energy prices. We know, like we said, we know what is exactly happening. Others would always have to say new layer of crisis in Ukraine, has triggered the prices of fuel, and I disagree. It's not only that. Africa has been faced with many other crises: COVID-19, climate change, the new layer of crisis in Ukraine, and so many others. So it would stabilize the price once we promote renewable energy. Reliability and resilience, because it would build the resilience of the community, meaning that the community will be in charge of their funds, will be in charge of their capacity, and so. And it also contributes, zero emission to global warming at one point, if renewable energy is promoted. And also improve public health. Most of the public health that we are faced with is as a result of climate change, which is triggered by coal, oil, and gas. So it means that it will improve public health. And again, as one benefit of renewable energy is the mass cutting on carbon emissions. If renewable energy is promoted, there will be a mass cut on carbon emissions, meaning that there will be almost zero emission as a result of the promotion of renewable energy. And again, it's cheaper form of electricity. People will be able to afford it. Prices are not going to be determined from importers, but rather we will be able to control our own the prices of the renewable energy. And it also protects our biodiversity. That's why we have our issue. Most of the biodiversity and the ecosystem is going extinct for the fact that big energy suppliers of gas, coal, and oil are in charge of the supply chain. So when we look at the solutions, for example, I think there is need to see how our governments, civil society, donors also support hydropower, for example. We can get our power from hydropower, and secondly from biomass, for example. And then also you can look at wind energy and also solar energy as solutions. For recommendations, I basically believe that we need to have the right policies. We need to have the political commitment, policies that respond to the support of renewable energy. We also need capacity, because when we talk about renewable energy, that is a new system of energy supply. So that there is the need to see how we have capacity to be able to understand, be able to collect data, be able to analyze, be able to process, and so on. And then there's also need for public budgets or public expenditures invest more into renewable energy. It's very important that we don't only have to depend on developed countries to decide on our renewable energy, but our public budgets should support and invest more in renewable energy. And we also need to have the capacity to collect data and analyze data. It's very important. So there's also need to see how investment is also geared towards building capacity on data collection. Infrastructure, we cannot do it without infrastructure. For example, infrastructure for storage of renewable energy, infrastructure for combined distribution of renewable energy are all very critical and are important for us to understand that we cannot do all this without proper infrastructure. And the other one is awareness and information creation is very, very central. And back to you, moderator. Thank you.
Well done, well presented and calculated. We'll look at Mr. Tando sharing with us the work of financiers and the impact of the LNG project in South Africa. Please, you can take the mic.
Thank you again, moderator. So I think let me start here. It's safe to say, I believe, South Africa is probably doing some of the more advanced work, at least on just transition, than some of our other partners. And I think in the experience that we've had, one of the things that is very quickly emerging is the complexity of this particular subject. Also further complicated by the fact that South Africa is markedly different in terms of its infrastructure, even just on energy, as compared to some of our continental colleagues. Now, if we look at, I'll put some notes here. So, over the years, South Africa has obviously been quite reliant on coal technology. One of the things that spurred on the Just Energy Transition Partnership, for instance, was this thing around how can we align to the 1.5, how can we closer meet our NDC targets as a country. Now, in so doing, we fully recognize the need to diversify our energy system to be able to bring renewable energies more so into our energy mix. Having done so, you know, it brings very much the question of how then does it impact specifically those who have not had in the past. For us, what was always an important, how could I say, point in our engagement or discourse, particularly on JETPs, is how do we address the justice components? So we're talking about the issues around unemployment, the issues around poverty, the issues around inequality in South Africa. If we were talking about a just energy transition, we're talking about an energy system which will provide energy to a wider number of South African citizens. It would create the necessary diversification of our energy mix. It would create the necessary security of supply for our energy. The problem then that we faced is then the financing of this particular transition. Now, what we know, having gotten to this stage, is those who finance coal in South Africa are also the ones who are largely backing the transition, specifically for RE, both wind and solar primarily. We're talking about the big banks primarily in South Africa, so the big four. We're also talking about the African Development Bank. We're talking about the Development Bank of South Africa. So how we've tried to resolve this is that in SA, we place a pretty strong emphasis on the need for social dialogue. What this creates is an environment where those different interests from business, from labor, from civil society, are sitting, and government of course, are sitting in the same table trying to understand how exactly to unpack some of these difficult challenges. And it's not to say that it's a simple fix. If we talk about South Africa's JETP, as was announced by the president last week Friday, I think it's brilliant to be able to usher in a new way of thinking, a new way of doing energy, a new way of providing energy services. That is to say, in spite of all of its great efforts, there are still some challenges that it faces. And specifically, this one around particularly community engagement, community involvement, and community participation in the different areas within the value chain. What we typically emphasize a lot is how much engagement is happening at community level, the level of participation that they have in the decision making, because obviously any investment in this space is going to have a direct impact in these communities. The plans that we have to decommission coal-fired power stations, for instance, has a very serious downstream impacts on the industries within that immediate locality, but also on further downstream industries outside of that specific locality. So it becomes necessary then, if we're addressing the issues of transitions, at least in the South African context, how then we might be able to support those who would have been displaced as a result of that transition into a new space, into a new thinking. And this is what I think the Just Transition Framework, as pushed by what's called the Presidential Climate Commission, seeks to achieve. The Commission is a space where a lot of this thinking is currently taking place. And again, it's not foolproof yet, but it is part of a reiterative learning process. It creates an opportunity where one could argue whether we all are equal. I think George Orwell said it best, but it does create a platform where communities, for instance, can then have their say. And I think that's important for any country, including this idea of how the support, particularly from international donors, funders, or whomever, can have a say in how much engagement can be had with local communities. Because we run the risk, if we don't engage and work with everyone together on this thing, we run the risk of recreating previous injustices. We run the risk of then pushing out those who haven't had in the past, again, into this new dispensation. So it's a very, I think South Africa's experience for us has shown that it's a very complex environment, but it's not an environment that is going to be completed or at least done within one immediate solution, for instance, as we've had with the JETPs. The current phase where we're at is now looking at implementation. And I think that's where, outside of the thinking to develop the frameworks, to develop the plans, implementation, I think, is where the business is going to be. Because now it talks about the necessary institutions that need to be in place that aren't already in place that will help address some of these issues. We already know that there's the PCC, which is going to be spearheading this, but largely the National Treasury, because I mean we're talking about financial instruments here and financial arrangements, right? Is completely instrumental in this, but National Treasury doesn't have a direct mandate, for instance, to engage with communities, if you will. So having structures like the Presidential Climate Commission or something similar to it, where social partners can come together and engage on what exactly the best implementation plan ought to be, becomes absolutely critical, because that is then the place where people can then find where is our level of involvement as we then move into this new dispensation, if you will, into this new future around energy provision. Thank you.
Well done. This is practical, and we really appreciate that. But I have a question for you. What are the lessons you've learned through the civil society efforts in your country, both the success and the failures, that you can share with others to accelerate a just transition from fossil fuel to renewable energy? And I want to inform the audience that you have time for your questions, so please, you can put down your questions. Okay, so I'll just give one example of a failure, one example of a success, if that's okay. I think let's start with the failure. So in the pursuit of energy security, we, in the past, as a country and also as communities, particularly as civil society, have been against the idea of fracking, shale gas exploration, for instance, to help bolster up our energy security. Over the years, the shale gas fracking, however you term it, moved away from the spotlight. And as a result of it having moved away from the spotlight, has really gained some serious traction. At the moment, there's a facility that is now fully operational and commercial that is intended to produce 5,000 kilograms per day of helium, 24,000 gigatons per day of LNG, and then 60 megawatts of gas to liquid, in order to supply and support South Africa's energy infrastructure. Now, all of that is coming through shale gas. So this means there's going to be significant destruction of the environment in us trying to extract this resource. So in our perspective, that is a failure on our part, right? But a success is Shell. Shell in South Africa received license to go and explore. They had plans to do seismic blasting, specifically along the coast of South Africa. We used a combination of both local actions and also decentralized actions in wherever Shell is located in South Africa, and encourage the participation of the public to kind of push back on that. As a result of all that campaigning work, both at a local level, at a national level, at a regional level, to some extent global too,
who were able then to push back on Shell, and then they ended up losing the case and having to stop any explorations on their South Africa's offshore reserves. We are currently entering a similar phase with Total Energy as well. And of course, we want to be using those same type of strategies to kind of bolster our fight. But of course, in such an example, it would be naive for us to think that it's only, for instance, civil society that becomes wiser about how to engage in terms of strategies and tactics, right? Even some of these organizations become wiser around their own strategies and tactics about some of these explorations. So there has to be that continuous engagement, particularly with outside partners, to figure out how then, as these organizations try to advance their own agendas, how is it that we also diversify and our strategies and tactics to kind of push back on whatever kind of advances that they might try to make. I think I'll end there. Thanks.
Yeah, so this means that it's not only the idea of just being a civil society, but having that tactics and having that strategy. My last question is, in what way can we push for a clear policy framework for a just transition, which prioritizes investment in renewable energy, that promotes local participation and ownership of distributed renewable energy initiatives?
So again, here for us, it was this body called the Presidential Climate Commission. The beauty with it is that it sits within the presidency, and it's responsible really for driving much of the thinking and then in part some of the implementation around South Africa's just transition specifically. Now, what is important again is this idea of allowing for participation of different social actors in that space, because there are competing interests. I think if we're 100% honest with each other, there are competing interests here, right? The interest is you've got certain organizations that understand that they need to be able to provide energy to South Africa, for instance, and there's an investment opportunity that's present there. If we are not participating in those spaces where some of these conversations are had as civil society, for instance, and civil society across the spectrum, so we're talking large-scale NGOs, including your community-based organizations, our disengagement from these spaces means the dominant voices then obviously win the narrative and then win the ultimate policy battle. So for us, it's always to try and encourage at various levels participation within the policy space, participation in very difficult conversations with those that we might disagree with on what we think might be the best way possible. And then obviously that whole thing around how do you continuously educate so that some of the strength that comes within civil society, because we might not have necessarily economic strength, but we have the strength of the numbers. And sometimes it's the strength of the numbers that helps to push and get us over the line, as it were, than what you would find if we were just exclusively dependent on economics. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'll move on to Musa. We hear many financial institutions mention that midstream oil and gas projects are needed because it will project or protect us from energy crisis in Africa. What would you say is the mere greenwash efforts? So we hear many financial institutions mention the midstream of oil and gas projects are needed because it will protect us from the energy crisis in Africa. What would you say is the mere greenwashing efforts? Yeah.
First of all, I will say that they need to put money where it matters. Where they are putting the money is where it does not matter. Where it matters is monies that it seems to develop and develop the resilience of the community. That's where the money needs to be. Not actually mainstreaming oil and gas. For me, that is those are statements that are only meant to brainwash people. We see what is happening. The prices of gas and oil is on the rise. People are struggling because for the fact that they have decided in one way or the other to increase the price of gas and oil, and that's not really helping us. That is what that is doing to us is it's making life more difficult economically and also in food security and nutrition is really challenging. I really do not agree on the mainstreaming. I think it's a lose-lose situation. As I said initially, we need to have a win-win situation. Put the money where it matters. That's what we need.
Brilliant. And I know that this is important, and it's happening because it's happening everywhere. So thank you for this submission. My last question is, how can the African continent transition away from fossil fuel and push for a multilateral development bank finance to clean energy?
First of all, attitudes. We need to believe in ourselves that we can do it. That is where we have to start on. We believe that it happens, that we have struggled, but the opportunities are there that we can do it. And secondly, it calls for political commitment. We need to have politicians to really respond to the development and support of renewable energy. And third is it needs capacity. In capacity to really be able to manage, store, and distribute renewable energy. And fourth is it requires an inclusive participation of all. All hands must be on deck. That is, everybody must be included. Gender, women, youth, we all have a stake in this, and we must be recognized as the right partners, and not to be seen on the other side of the scale, but we are people who can contribute, and we have capacities to contribute. And fourth is we need to have more investment into research, investment into data collection, investment into data processing, investment into data analysis. And thank you very much.
Thank you. So we need inclusive, equal participation, leaving no one behind in this conversation. Charity, what can we do as African CSOs to ensure our government commit to transitioning to clean energy? What can our government do to make sure renewable energy initiatives are people-centered?
Thank you. I think one, it's what we are doing now. The reason why we are all here at COP is because we want to raise our voices to our leaders. We need to be able to make them change the rules because the current rules are not working. I think what we need to do to make our governments change is believe in a bottom-up strategy that we can divest from their power and invest in people power. We need to move away from the current ways of doing things which are extractive and exploitative to a new system of doing things that is more regenerative and cooperative. The other thing I think governments can also do to ensure that we are focusing on green solutions is that we need to change. We need to have legal compliance systems that are not supporting governments to infringe on people's rights, but legal compliance systems that are there to support the people. I think we need to have a more visionary approach that is people-centered and that prioritizes community-led approaches to meet their energy needs.
All right. So we need this in order to help in achieving the renewable energy initiatives. How then do you promote the democratized energy systems that foster the participation and ownership of local communities with regards to their energy access at the grassroots?
I think, as most of my panelists have mentioned, what is key is transparency in the system. We need to ensure that we are holding our leaders accountable in terms of whatever they are doing, because they are making decisions on our behalf, and we need to know what decisions they are doing. So it's one of the reasons most of us are here at COP, because we want that kind of accountability. We want to see what they are doing on our behalf. We also need to build awareness among local communities. We are here as representatives of communities that could not make it here at COP, communities that could not show up because one way or another they are not probably privileged enough to be here, but we need to be representatives of those voices, and we need to build awareness and capacity within them to be able to fight for their rights. So I think awareness creation is really essential. I think also the government, in as much as we put them to task, we need also to ensure that we are being inclusive. So we are not, we're bringing women and youth at the center of all the decision making, because we cannot move to a just transition system without including everyone. So I think, those are a couple of principles that we can rely on to make our governments accountable and ensure that we are moving in the right path.
Great. These are excellent steps. But with Samuel, how can we ensure that public finance factually supports just transition in a just manner that is mitigating community level impact, mitigating rise in human rights violations?
Okay, thank you very much. I think for public finance to be aligned with what we need, first of all, I will speak in terms of my country, especially in Uganda. I believe that much of the public finance should be aligned with the kind of energy that we need and not the kind of energy that is available and has a potential within our country. We know that the involvement of the local community, the local people, in making decisions, in democratizing the kind of energy we need is very critical. And the public finance should be looking into that. We want to avoid the scenario where the public finance, again, invests heavily in clean energy and make us dependent on them. That will still push us back into the death trap. We want to make sure that we are able to democratize, make sure that our country is able to take charge of the kind of energy that we have, exploit the renewable energy which is in our country, and be able to exploit it for the benefit of the people. Speaking for the case of Uganda, the studies from the Ministry of Energy indicate that we have a potential of 5,200 megawatts of clean energy within the country. If we invested and exploited it, we would not need any investment in fossil fuels. Because first of all, our country, we are one of those which are most hit by climate change, and we don't want to increase more of the carbon and worsen the impacts already. There's a saying in our country that says that when you fall into a ditch, don't dig it further. Instead, see how we can be able to jump out of it and see how we can be able to move. Thank you.
Okay, great. Would ECA and their financial instruments at all be able to play a meaningful role in fostering a just transition in the global south?
Sorry?
Would ECAs and financial instruments at all be able to play meaningful roles in fostering a just transition in the global south?
Yes, they have a role. Like I think Richard earlier was saying, about 55 billion per year from the Paris Agreement time has been invested yearly to fossil fuels. If we're able to channel that kind of investment and ensure that it doesn't add more carbon into the atmosphere, but instead it's in a sustainable development way, it really would be critical. I think in Uganda about 3 months back, the EU made a resolution in the country and identified 3 key things that must be done. One of which was basically looking into the environmental impacts of oil activities in the country, and was trying to advise the country, ensuring that we are able to protect our own people. So it also raised an issue in regards to human rights, especially for the human rights defenders, the community, the CSOs that have been defending the rights of the communities, but also for the delayed compensation. And we find out these were some of the fundamental issues that were raised, as much as it's binding resolution, but the issues that were raised were fundamental to the economy of Uganda and ensuring that we're able to achieve the best we can possibly do. So SCS in the global north have a role in ensuring that we're able to transit. They make public policies, especially in exporting finance to global south. In regards to the COP26 statement, they made a commitment that they would be able to end public support for fossil fuels by end of this year. But you know that some of them have not yet put in these policies, and the others are still lagging behind, and may be able to continue extending further. And yet the impacts in our countries is extending each and every day, and we want this stopped now. And I'm sure that they have a clear role in ensuring that we're able to transit.
Thank you very much. Well done. Mr. Kenneth, what can be done to empower these local communities to speak up against the further development and expansion of ECAs?
Thank you very much. In July 2021, the Ministry of Energy asked Parliament that they need about 1.65 billion dollars that's for Ghana Petroleum Corporation, so that they'll be able to do more exploration of gas. What we need to do is still empower the community to stand against that. And want the ECA's countries to be fair and just and stand on their COP26 pledge, not to give support in this project, but channel it into renewable, channel it into young people building their capacity, so that we'll be able to have a clean energy and also just transition and just work for our various community.
Okay, thank you very much. What is needed to move ECAs and private banks that finance fossil fuels in your country to reduction and withdraw from fossil fuels to turn to funding renewable energy instead?
What we need is the political will. What we need is their commitment for the future. They should not look now. The promise is too much, but let's put action into it. So we are calling ECA that this is the time for them to show leadership, especially UK, United Kingdom. We are calling them because we see that most of their funding is coming from them. Thank you.
Great. This is a very wonderful submission from our panel. It's time to ask questions. You raise a hand. Great. And please, if you could come closer, can we have the mic? Please, if you can come closer, 2 people at a time. Kindly come to the podium. A round of applause to our panel. Thank you. Please, you can ask your question.
My name is Isabelle from Kenya. I'm quite interested to hear from all of you, because everybody's talking about renewable energy, but then the continent hosts the critical minerals. So we've had displacement. I come from a community that's been flooded out by dams. Kenya right now has a dam that is going to flood out about 5 villages. We've seen it in Bui in Ghana. We've seen it in Pandankua. We've seen the hydro dams messing up the continent. So is it just the simple shift? We've seen the displacement of communities. My own community has lost land from a renewable energy project, the largest wind farm. So I'd like to hear a little bit more, because the climate crisis is not only about carbon. It's about food systems. It's about displacement of communities. It's land loss. It's the defending of the commons. So I wanted to hear a little bit more around beyond just saying move to renewable energies, because Eric is here. The DRC is one of the most affected because of the Grandinga and the minerals that is being mined from the region. So a little bit more on that, because whether we shift as a continent, we are still the losers, because it's the mining that's going to happen in our continent. So I'd like to hear a little bit more on that.
Okay, please, you can take the mic, Musa. Thank you for your question. Please, a round of applause to her. Thank you. Musa, you can answer that.
Let me allow her to take a seat, and maybe thank you very much. I think when you talk about climate change, we have to look at it from all angles. Basically, first of all, what we need to have at our different countries is to have land use policies. When we have land use policies will be able to identify where can be mined, where can be used as agricultural production, which sites can also be used as residential. We need to have, first of all, land use policies. The other one also is we need to have more collaboration in and within our different species. Meaning that there is need to really push for fossil fuel advocacy. It has to really get into all the countries. We need to have created that network. Once we are together, once we shout, then people would hear. One time I had this from, there's a pastor in South Africa, a renowned one. He said that when you shout, you have to shout together so that you will be heard together. I think basically maybe the other one has to look at capacity, and thank you very much.
Charity, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think I can just probably add to that. As I had indicated earlier in my initial remarks, it is true that if we just move from one system of energy and replace it with another, it will just be another transition and not a just transition. So what we really need is a transformative transition. So we need to look beyond just energy. We need to consider other sectors as well. We cannot achieve a just transition without a holistic approach. So we need to be to move away from just an environmental and social imperative, and we need to integrate justice at the core of the principle of just transition. We need ownership models that are decentralized and owned by the people. So that inclusive and transformative process, which I think is a dream come true. I mean, if that were to happen, is what we need, not just a shift from one system of energy to another.
I think the answer to your question is not simple. Because as I indicated, is that there are very many conflicting interests here. And if we're honest with each other, some are more powerful than others. But I think it's important also to try and recognize where the strengths lie within the respective interests. If we look at least as civil society, what we have working for us oftentimes is public sentiment to an extent, because a community that's been displaced by any kind of development of any nature can relate to another community that's been displaced by development of another nature. The question for me at least becomes, how, I want to try and navigate this minefield slowly. How do we move in a regulatory environment that is oftentimes not as open as we would like it to be? And sometimes it's necessary for us to look outside of ourselves, and ourselves in this case could be the communities that we're in, to be able to get that kind of support. Because what we've experienced, for instance, in South Africa, is that sometimes it's easier to rely on some of our external allies and friends to apply the kinds of pressure that we need that we might not be able to provide, locally at least. We also have to understand, though, in this very complex conversation, that we have to be able to address the very real needs of development that exist, right? In South Africa, we've got, we've got fairly good electrification. I think about 90% somewhere there. but we've also got those who are not connected to the grid. Question is, how are we going to connect them to the grid? Because they need to. It's not a matter of there are some that have to just accept the fact that they're not going to. No. There's no such thing. We have to somehow. And it's in the response to that I think presents some opportunities for us in how we engage, particularly with some of those interests that are very strong. What I've learned in this COP space is that some of the things that are on the table, we have to be 100% real with ourselves and ask, what is it that we're willing to lose in order to gain? And that now is what makes this whole entire thing all the more difficult. Because the fact of the matter is that we're not going to get everything. Similarly, not everybody else on the other side of the fence, other interests, are going to get everything that they want. So it's incumbent on us then to try and rationalize within ourselves as we're about to go into these difficult conversations. Because even if you do take DRC, right, and the mining activity, for instance, that's happening in DRC, it is being a massive contributor to many economies. Maybe not as much as we would like specifically for DRC, but it does contribute. If we completely shift from that, what is it? We create a vacuum, and we have to be able to fill that vacuum. We have to answer questions around how we're going to fill that vacuum without just completely just removing. And sometimes those are not easy conversations to have, and they require a certain level of frankness that I think needs to be had in a conversation, at least between two parties. So it really isn't an easy one, but it's just one of those things that we, at least as we engage on these issues, recognize that it's something that needs to be done. And it's a difficult conversation that just needs to be had. And again, we have the benefit of reiterative processes and hindsight that help inform how it is that we might be able to move forward.
Great. Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause to the panelists. I think what makes it crucial is the fact that the position of Africa is clear at this COP, that is on loss and damage. And each country's just transition is different. So we have to have a country perspective on this just transition conversation we are having. I would want to have your closing statement, starting from Kenneth.
Just transition is the best way to go, but we should not forget the vulnerable community who have suffered most. In loss and damage, now we are not looking we are looking for a soft loan for those various communities so that they can admit to it. We're also calling for the ECAs to stand in their pledge in COP26. And we're also calling for our leaders to have the political will and to make sure that the various communities that are suffering most will have a way out. Thank you.
I think historical mistakes should not be an escape for Africa to continue exploiting oil and gas. We know that there has been a debate saying they have already developed with the fossil fuels. Let's do it. But we suffer the most impacts more than even they are because we have limited capacity to adapt to climate change. It's actually a matter of life and death. Let's push that they follow the commitments that they have made and ensure that this climate finance is increased, align their public policies with the 1.5 degree centigrade, and ensure that we are able to transform and transit to cleaner energy in Africa. Thank you.
Addressing the climate crisis is more than just stopping new fossil fuels or shifting away from fossil fuel development. It's more than reducing pollution and carbon emissions to mitigate the impacts of climate change. It's more about centering justice and rebuilding systems equitably in the interest of all, especially the marginalized and the most vulnerable communities.
Thank you very much once again. Just two words or two phrases. One is no individual or individual organization can do it alone. We need to collaborate. We need to create networking to push together. And the second one is we need to see that there is an inclusive participation of all. And thank you.
Tando.
Final words. I think we must always remember that all of the work that we do, whichever lens one takes, people are the beginning and the end of it. Well, all that we're doing is really trying to create systems and policies and things that will facilitate in the improved lives of people. For us, we're of the view that as we transition, as we move forward, we cannot talk about all of the wonderful topics that we talk about if we aren't going to be thinking of people and at least paying some mind to how we improve the material conditions of the people that we live in. And we won't be prescriptive to say how that must look like, but it certainly has to be front of mind. It's about people. It's about people. At the end of the day, it's the people that make us, and if the people aren't happy, it will be the people that will break it as well. Thanks.
I would want to commend you all for your great submissions. This panel has been great on whatever that they have to say and has been clear that in aligning public finance with the 1.5 degrees goal and a just transition for Africa, we need to all collaborate and have an African-centered initiative. I would want us to clap for our panel and thank them very much. Please wait as Richard wraps up for a call of action.
Thank you very much to our wonderful moderator. I think she deserves a round of applause. And another round of applause to all our panelists. Thank you very much for the great insights that has been shared. I think that from this session we have heard that a just transition needs to be transformative and be people-centered. We've also heard that there's a need for a lot of awareness to be created and also to empower communities to be able to stand against the expansion of fossil fuels, which has impacted them. We've also seen the need for strong political willpower of our governments to actually ensure that there is a just energy transition for us all. And more so, the need for transparency and accountability. And finally, to ensure inclusivity and participation of all in decision-making processes when it comes to our energy needs. And with this, we call on the MDBs, the ECAs from developed countries to invest in clean energy. We want the public finance to be aligned to the 1.5 degrees Paris Agreement target, and also ensure that communities benefit from the resources that they have. Communities are at the center of the decision-making process and are also involved in the decision-making process, not that governments and leaders sit and negotiate and start exploiting resources at the expense of the development of these communities. With this, I want to thank you all for making it to this event. As I mentioned earlier, this event wouldn't have been possible without the help of organizing organizations like the both ends, Milieudefensie, EGI, AbibiNsroma Foundation, and Alliance for Empowering Rural Communities. We thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you next year at COP. Thank you very much to our panelists. Yeah, and yes, let's have a group photo. Yes.